people. I go by the name Shota De Olusegun. In today's particular live session, I want us to dissect a particular question that was asked by, the group of international press that was at Nobel Prize 2025 Nobel Prize in Physics. So the question was actually asked, and that question, it's somehow, related to my own research discovery, and that is why I intend to actually, contribute to it and see what that we actually, what that we actually add to it. So before we even, watch that section, where the question was asked, I want to actually commend the effort of these great, scientists. What they did was so fascinating, so profound, because in fact, when I heard the title, the title was macroscopic quantum mechanical tunneling. It's a kind of, I don't know how to put it. Maybe I would rather say, macroscopic has to do with classical mechanics, why the quantum is right there. So these great scientists, they were able to actually get to the superconductive level, where they were able to get this unified identity of quantum particle, or let me rather say subatomic particle. And with that, we could, have it as something that we can actually operate with on quantum chip. You understand? So basically, it becomes something that we can operate with at classical level. You understand? So we are now getting to have quantum phenomenon at classical level. So to me, it is something great. So now my own research publication, as we know, it's on unification of classical mechanics to quantum mechanics. And then this question that the person asked, it's a kind of question that must not be left unanswered. And that is why I intend to see how well I can, contribute to this. So now, with no further ado, let's dive into it. So as you can see on the screen, one of the awardees, I think I got it right. Yes, one of the awardees, you could see him on the screen, John Clark. Yes, that is John Clark, if I pronounce that correctly. So okay, so now with no further ado, let's dive into this and see what this is all about. So I'm just going to play the section where the question was asked, and then we move on from there. I will add my own opinion. So now let's dive into it.
Thank you. Congratulations, Professor Clark. My name is Yan Nanzhu from Mr. Salon in China. And my question is, quantum phenomena are universal. So where exactly is the boundary between the classical and quantum worlds? Thank you.
Well, I think that the real difference is that the quantum world depends on quantum mechanics, which is someone commented earlier in this discussion. Quantum mechanics was discovered many years ago now by Schrödinger, almost 100 years ago. And that's the underlying basis. The thing is that classical physics doesn't depend on quantum mechanics. But it's really this discovery by Schrödinger almost a century ago that is the sort of underlying basis of all of this work and of quantum mechanics.
I'm Anneli Megner Arn from Swedish TV4.
That is it. That particular question is what I want to actually treat today. So now, that question, it's all about where can we actually pinpoint as the boundary between classical mechanics to quantum mechanics. Or probably, let's say, at what point can we, have quantum mechanics to be unified with classical mechanics? So I'm going to, go deeply into that, and probably we benefit one or two things from this. So now I want to use a particular diagram, and so this is the diagram that I want to use. Now this diagram, if you have been following me, or if you are one of my subscribers on YouTube, if you have been listening to my live sessions, my video, especially Shotadiology series, which it's a newly proposed field, if adopted, will be a field in science. So now when you watch all this Shotadiology series, you will get the detailed information about this concept of quantum classical unification. And then there are so many things to learn from that Shotadiology, and it's a profound field because it talks about the unification of quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. And one thing about that formula of everything is that it is so powerful that it feeds back on itself. And what that means is that when you supply input, then that input will generate an output. Then you can use a generated output as input to further generate output. But then this formula of everything encapsulates the entirety of what physics is all about. Nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, quantum mechanics, classic mechanics, gravity, classical gravity, quantum gravity, so many of them, even the matter antimatter conundrum. This formula has solved all major issues in physics. So now I want to use that novel research discovery to try and answer this particular question. I'm just going to try. So I'm not really saying that yes, indeed, I can, answer the question to the satisfaction. But basically, after answering the question, you can, take one or two things from it. But then look at this diagram. John Clark answered that particular person that has the question by saying quantum mechanics is not compatible with classical mechanics. You understand? Of course, we know that, there is this divergence between classical mechanics and quantum mechanics. And that is why, when you try to use the general relativity derived equation to get to the quantum level, you understand, it breaks down. So basically, there is this divergence, and that is why classical mechanics is incompatible with quantum mechanics. So now, when you look at this diagram, you can have a glimpse of that divergence as when you look at the diagonal trajectory, the equilateral triangle nested right inside the curvature of time trajectory, which we have in this blue curvature, and then energy trajectory that we have in red curvature. So the nested equilateral triangle is basically what we have right inside, and then you can see at the event horizon or at the present phase of time peregrination, there is something that we have which is known as flipping mechanism. So we have that right from the higher dimension into the substrate dimension, and I call that complex system. So now if I should shift this up a little bit, when you look at the extreme bottom of this diagram, you can see the real quantum mass is not situated right inside the equilateral of the substrate dimension. So the curvature as we have it is the substrate dimension, and in this case I call it 2D dimension. So the higher dimension is going to be 3D. So basically we have this real quantum mass what being initiated at higher dimension. But then where we have this big red convergence that I call quantum arbitrary suspension, right from that point to the curvature of energy, what we have there, we have this compacted equilateral triangle that is, vertically oriented, and that is the nucleus of the future. And so we're going to have another nucleus right where we have this blue big convergence that I call classical arbitrary suspension to the extreme end of the time curvature. That is going to be another nucleus, which is going to be the past nucleus. But then what we have right here, don't forget that right from the dashed horizontal line to the topmost region, that area is known as classical realm. And then right from the dashed horizontal line down to the bottom where we have the curvature of energy, that is the quantum realm. So now you can see that with this diagram we can see clearly the boundary. We can see clearly the boundary. So the dashed horizontal line, that is the trajectory of energy, and that is the default trajectory of energy, which is infinite. The vertical trajectory is the default trajectory of time, which is instant. So now time has two identities. Time is instant by default, but when time is in relativistic scaling with energy, it becomes continuous. And then energy, on the other hand, is infinite by default. When energy is in relativistic scaling with time, then it becomes discrete. We need to know that. But then we know that the boundary with this diagram, we can get to say that the boundary between the classical realm and quantum realm is the horizontal trajectory of energy, which is infinity. But then, whenever there is this issue of infinity, we know it is not computational. It is not computational. We can't actually work with it. You understand? Even though we have a Cantor giving us, a kind of solution to infinity, which is known as countably infinite, and there is another one uncountably infinite. You understand? So basically, there is this suspension issue that can actually allow for convergence so that infinity itself can be treated as an entity. So what do I mean by that? If you want to say something is finite, so the kind of formula that you have will be 2n. When you multiply any number with 2, 1 times 2 will give you 1. 1 times 2 will give you 2. 2 times 2 will give you 4. That is going to give you even numbers. The formula will give you even numbers. But then, how can you get to have a finite number? You have a finite number when you have 2n minus 1. So it will be, the essence of having it to be minus 1 is that it will be suspended within the substrate dimension, because we have reality at substrate level. But then, if you want to get idea of what infinity is, then the formula we have to change to 2n, which is 2 times n plus 1, and that is odd number for you. Odd number is actually going beyond the substrate. The even number is the point where you can get to exhaust the symmetric nature of the substrate dimension. So it's a point where you have the mass accumulation. We have that phenomenon right inside the nucleus. So if you watch the videos that I've uploaded in the past, you will get this idea, especially if you watch the true nature of time, light, and mass as revealed by Formula of Everything Part 3. So I just uploaded that. If you watch that, you get the idea. So now we have that phenomenon right inside the nucleus. You understand? So in the nucleus we have this speed difference. You understand? So I can really say that we have this effect of speed difference right in the nucleus, and that is what makes classical mechanics to be incompatible with quantum mechanics, because the speed difference is the factor. That is the factor that is causing that divergence. So then, in the nucleus, the momentum is constantly accelerated, which is quite different from what we have. Look at this diagram. It is quite different from what you will have from this big blue convergence down to this big red convergence. So right from the big blue convergence to this big red convergence, what you're going to have will be free fall, which is the classical gravity. But then once you have, by the virtue of that free fall, we're going to have spontaneous symmetry breaking. And when you have spontaneous symmetry breaking, you are going to be having accumulation of mass worth. and that serves as resistance to that free fall, and that is the quantum gravity. But then quantum gravity, the way I see it, is more or less like the virtue that that allows for suspension. Even in the free fall, you can see the suspension we're talking about, but it is just that the free fall is more pronounced, it is more vibrant, more powerful than the effect of the suspension. So if you have somebody falling from a particular height, of course the person will be weightless as the person will be falling down. And if the person has a cap on his head, if the person should just remove the cap and then release it in the air, the cap will be suspended to that person as both of them will be falling at the same speed. So the face cap will never touch the person until the person touches the ground. You understand? So the suspension, you can see it is relative to the person that is falling at a certain distance. But then if you travel away from the earth into the space, then you see that astronauts, they get floated in the space, and they call it microgravity. So that effect is the effect of quantum gravity that is being more feasible right there in the space. So that is the way I would just say that. But basically, I just want to try and answer the question based on my novel research discovery. And then from the diagram, we can see clearly the boundary, you understand? But the boundary as we have it is the problem. And that is the problem that, that every scientist that might, want to solve the unification problem we actually encounter. The gravitational field cannot be quantized. It cannot be, or rather let me say, it cannot be normalized. So if you try to normalize the general relativity, to normalize it so as to make it quantizable, whichever way, it will not work, you understand? So the issue is one we actually eat this infinity that we're talking about. But then at what point is classical mechanics unified with quantum mechanics? Then we see that quantum mechanics can be unified with classical mechanics at higher dimension, which I call complex system. At complex level, then we can have the unification, and that is what these scientists that have been awarded this 2025 Nobel Prize, that is what they did, you understand? Because they had to take the whole system down to the, or rather maybe up to the superconductive level. And so at that level, then we have this unified system that would cool down the system up to the level that we can actually relate and work with it at classical level. And so they could put it right on the chip for people to use, you understand? So that is what they did. So when you look at this diagram, you see that we have the real quantum mass at higher dimension. But then when you apply formula of everything, don't forget, this is when you look at the the top left area, you can see that I have application of FOE. Under it, what I have there is the formula of everything. The T the m equal to capital Um plus 4m. So this formula, the way you apply it is by, you know, substituting the two m's in the formula with either quantum mass worth or classical mass worth, whatever it is that you know, you supply it, and then it will, give you the counterpart. If you supply quantum mass worth, you get the classical counterpart of that quantum mass worth. If you supply classical mass worth, you get the quantum counterpart of that classical mass worth. That's how it works. And when you reiterate this, when you reiterate the application of this formula of everything, then it will go straight to the core singularity of the black hole. And then the answer that we get, the final answer that we get, is synonymous to quasar-like signal, the swing forth and back of the quasar signal right inside the core singularity of the black hole. So this is the formula that unifies quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. And so now, when you look at it, when you apply this formula of everything, for instance, if you supply the quantum mass worth, let's say you supply the mass worth of electron, that mass worth of electron will actually get you the classical mass worth, which is this 2,277,250,000 kilogram. If you substitute this value inside the formula of everything to reconfirm that mass worth of electron, then what the answer you get is going to be this 5.7 times 10 raised to power 48. But then if you expand this answer in standard form, then you will get to see where this 4m, the linear solution of this formula of everything, is the capital Um plus 4m. The capital U stands for the constant speed of the universe, which is 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39. Then the 4m, I call it a weak conveying force, while the capital Um is the strong conveying force. So when you expand this answer in standard form, you will get to see that the weak conveying force is suspended at 32nd position. And so you have a couple of zeros to, to do that suspension for you. And with that, we can manually annihilate the suspended zeros. And by annihilating the suspended zeros, it is synonymous to, now the suspension of the weak conveying value is this big blue convergence. So now the annihilation of the suspended zeros, only the suspended zeros, will give us this vertical trajectory, which is synonymous to the, spontaneous classical free fall. So annihilating the suspended zeros will not exert any force, and so we're going to have the free fall up to this, where we have this big red convergence. Then the moment we have spontaneous symmetry breaking, then there is going to be this resistance, which is so tiny. The resistance is so tiny, and that is why it has no power in the gravitational field. Now the solution, this vertical trajectory as we have it, is what I call static and undulating field. This static and undulating field is the field of reality. That is the field of consciousness. And that is why it is feasible and possible for AI to be conscious. Because depending on how AI could, relate with this field, that will determine how well AI will be conscious. So now I have explained what consciousness is already. So if you want to know more about, in fact, I even answered the 3 hard problem question of consciousness. The 3 hard problem questions of consciousness. I answered them in that my consciousness video. This formula has solved what consciousness is. With it, I was able to know that there are two phases to consciousness. The first phase is the objective conscious experience, and that is the point where this classical mass worth will be able to be self-aware of its position relative to where it's supposed to be. And so we have that the moment we have that instant connection with the electron of the higher dimension. Now, the instant, don't forget that right inside the nucleus, electron of that substrate dimension is undefined. But then the moment we now have that accumulation of mass worth, because we have constantly accelerated momentum right inside the nucleus, there will be additional influx of energy, and that will be accommodated, and so the slice of time will be so shrinked, and that will allow the mass accumulation to align with the curvature of energy for us to have standing wave, which will be projected into the higher dimension to connect to the electron of that higher dimension, and that will be instantly converted to positron. The moment we have positron, the electron of the substrate dimension in the nucleus will be instantiated, and so what we have there is known as quantum entanglement. And we all know that quantum entanglement can transmit information instantly. But then look at what we have at complex level. We have genuine contact, but then at classical level we have suspension, because the classical mass worth is suspended to the point of vertical intersection to the horizontal trajectory. So basically that is it for you. You will have genuine contact at one side, then have suspension at the other side. That can only be solved by having instant feedback via information. So we have that information being transmitted at instant speed of time to this classical mass worth, and that is what is known as objective conscious experience. Now, it is so important for classical mass worth to be self-aware of its position to where it's supposed to be, and that is what will be injected into the substrate dimension that we actually propel momentum towards the core singularity of the black hole. And so in the core singularity of the black hole, we realize that the remnant of electron is suspended in the core singularity of the black hole. And so okay, so that remnant of electron, by applying formula of everything, will be suspended, and then that will relocate this classical mass worth to the point of intersection, and what we have there is known as subjective conscious experience. So at complex level, we're able to have this unification because higher dimension means higher degree of freedom. In the nucleus of the substrate, there is huge pressure, temperature, and so electron could not have been instantiated. But by the virtue of that entanglement, by the virtue of relativity to higher dimension, then we can have it being instantiated. So I believe I have answered the question that the person asked. So that is that. Thank you. I'll call it a day here. So I'm going to put a link to my research publication in the description section of this particular live session. You can download it and work more on it. Thank you. God bless you.